tonight's speaker, as we're both of us have mentioned, is John Pregler. John resides in Dubuque, Iowa, where his family has roots going back, I believe, John, the 1840s or
Correct.
somewhere, a generation or seven back. By day, John is a management solutions consultant, and all other times he's an independent historian and researcher with a strong interest in Dubuque history in the 19th and early 20th centuries. He is the author of Historic Tales of Old Dubuque and keeper of the website The Lens of History that you can visit at your leisure. He's published 2 articles in SABR's baseball research journal, one on Tom Loftus, who we'll hear something about tonight, and the other on the evolution of the American League. I think that was last year or the year before, relatively recent article. Tonight, John's topic is Dubuque, an early cradle of baseball history. And John, if you want to, let's bring the slides on up and we'll get started.
All right, super. Let me know once you see the slideshow on your screen.
And you're good.
All right, super. Well, thank you, everybody. As Bob has mentioned, my name's John Pregler. I'm a lifelong Dubuquer. My family's been around here since the 1840s. So naturally, I grew up a lifelong New York Mets fan. And that's thanks to my mother. She grew up listening to the Yankees with her grandfather, and Casey Stengel was the manager, and she had 7 boys. And when my older brothers started becoming of age to get into sports and baseball, she had to pick a team. So she chose the brand new New York Mets led by Casey Stengel. So that's how I became a New York Mets fan. But here in Dubuque, Dubuque is where the Field of Dreams was filmed. And we have a very rich baseball history here in Dubuque that we'll talk about here tonight. And so Dubuque on this 1842 map of the United States is there where Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin meet, represented by the yellow circle there. Dubuque in the Midwest is not necessarily a flyover country like the West Coast and East Coast oftentimes refer to it as. And a lot of early American history evolved and started in the upper Mississippi River Valley where Dubuque is located. So we have a very rich history, largely because of our early mineral deposits in our forest. The very first mineral rush was not the gold rush of 1849. It was the lead rush to the Dubuque and tri-state area of 1833 after the Black Hawk Purchase. And from that point on, Dubuque became the key city known as the key city to the Northwest. And on the map, you can see Wisconsin is titled Northwest Territory because Iowa and Wisconsin were not part of, were not organized states, I should say, in 1842. And in Dubuque in 1838, at a public meeting, a man by the name of John Plum Jr. Had made a suggestion that our local congressman, George Wallace Jones, petitioned the United States Congress for money to explore a railroad from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. He was the first person to recommend a transcontinental railroad. Plum was a civil engineer, and Jones actually ended up getting $5,000 to study the topic, and it was the first funding Congress put forth towards the transcontinental railroad. And this will play into our baseball history here in a moment. So the railroads really especially in the early 1850s, were making their way to the Mississippi River. And the race was on when Asa Whitley had said that the Transcontinental Railroad was going to have to pass through Iowa. So during that time, Dubuque's really started to grow. in the 1840s and then in the 1850s. And when the Illinois Central Railroad got the very first federal land grant to build the Illinois Central, a year after they started, the president and chief engineer of the Illinois Central Railroad came to Dubuque and started the Dubuque and Pacific Railroad as their effort to be the first to reach the Pacific Ocean going through Dubuque was the goal. And so that brought a whole host of people from all over the country, especially the Northeast, migrating into the upper Northwest, which really until the beginning of the 20th century, the Northwest or the West was really the Mississippi River. It wasn't until the early 20th century that the Northwest started to really be considered the Seattle, Idaho, Oregon area. So during this time, as Dubuque was really growing, especially during the 1850s. Baseball obviously was in its infancy in the United States and starting to spread, especially after 1845. And one of the things that we talk about a lot, especially on the Protoball websites and pre-professional baseball or pre-1869 is what really caused the spread of baseball in the United States. Was it railroads? Was it the newspaper? A lot of people talk about it was the Civil War and soldiers learning to play during the Civil War. And then those veterans coming home and having seen the game or played the game, bringing it to their communities. Well, in my research here, it was very clear in Dubuque's case, the reason baseball showed up in Dubuque in 1855 was not because of the Civil War, because it was pre-Civil War, and it wasn't because of the newspapers. It was in part because of the railroad, only because the railroad brought all these New Yorkers with them. Most of the transcontinental railroad and most of the railroads that were built in the Northwest and the West were built by New Yorkers and New York financiers. And it brought a whole host of migrants from New York State to Dubuque, Iowa. And so we saw the development of the Excelsior Club, the New York Society here in Dubuque in the 1850s, right around the time the first exhibition ball game was allegedly played in Dubuque in 1855. And I say allegedly because we can't find the newspaper article because there's no microfilm of the papers from 1855 surviving for Dubuque. But there are 1870 history books on Dubuque County that when you read through it, you can very well tell they're taking their history straight out of the newspapers. And it's stated as early as 1870 that the first exhibition game in Dubuque was in 1855. The first verifiable game in Iowa was in 1858 in Davenport, Iowa. But I truly believe that baseball really started to develop in Dubuque in the 1850s because of this influx of all these New Yorkers that were coming to the Midwest to build the railroads, to build businesses, and really capitalize on the availability of land and everything else in Dubuque. So although we had these New Yorkers in Dubuque, they were more focused on their business and growing the state. But in 1863, we saw in the Dubuque Democratic Herald a story about a game of two-cornered cat ball being played in Washington Park in Dubuque, which still exists in the downtown area. And so they said we saw an enormous thing in the way of a game of old-fashioned two-cornered cat ball in the park lately, is the way the article started out. And then in June that year, we saw another article where the 4th Ward was playing the 3rd Ward in a game of baseball. And when you look at the list of the names of the people on the teams, a large part of them are originally from New York State. So they were not only playing two-cornered cat in Dubuque, but they started playing baseball in 1863. And that's really when baseball took hold then in Dubuque, as far as I can tell from the research in the newspapers. If there was a lot of it being played prior to that, it was not being published. And so then in August of 1863, the first Hawkeye baseball club ended up showing up in Dubuque and would appear then throughout the 1860s as one of the teams in the Dubuque area. Now, the interesting fact about the Dubuque Democratic Herald, at the time these articles were published, one of the owners and editors was Stilson Hutchinson, who went on to found the Washington Post in 1877. So he was the editor publishing some of these first stories about baseball in Dubuque. The next major event regarding the evolution of baseball and why I called this Dubuque an early cradle of baseball is because of this first event and a variety of other events that we'll talk about here through this evening. The first one was the Northwest baseball tournament that was sponsored by the Julian Baseball Club. Dubuque, Iowa is named after Julian Dubuque, so Julian Baseball Club is in honor of Julian Dubuque. In 1865, in August 28th and 29th, as we all know, in Washington, D.C., the Nationals hosted a national baseball tournament, and they invited the Athletics from Philadelphia and the Atlantics from Brooklyn, and the three teams played, and ultimately the Atlantics were crowned the national champions. Well, 1 month after that, in Dubuque, the Northwest Baseball Tournament was held. Teams from about 5 or 6 states around the Midwest were invited. St. Louis, Freeport, Dubuque all had teams that finished in the top 3. There were mention of other teams, but they weren't mentioned by name. In our research and discussions with people that run the Protoball website, as we look at firsts in baseball, of course, you always have to qualify what are all the qualifying factors that makes this the first what. But we generally believe most tournaments, and there were baseball tournaments prior to 1865, were really city championship tournaments to, the championship of the city, or it was at a state level at a state fair. We believe that the Washington August tournament and then the Dubuque September tournament were the first 2 regional baseball tournaments in the country. Now, during that tournament, one of the organizers of that tournament was Martin Stanley Robinson. He would go on, and his 3 boys were at that game, Frank DeHaas Robinson, M. Stanley Robinson, and Howard Robinson. They would go on to own the Cleveland Blues and ultimately the St. Louis Cardinals. So they were young boys in Dubuque during that tournament. There were 4 clerks that were involved, all from New York State. William Hyde Clark was born in Cooperstown in 1836. He had moved to Dubuque from Buffalo. He was a banker. He had been engaged in Dubuque baseball, the Excelsior Society and Club here in Dubuque, was the president of the Julian Baseball Club. Ultimately, they named the club after him, as well as a local guard post because he was a Civil War veteran. His grandfather, I believe, built Hyde Hall there near Cooperstown. And then there was W.R. Clark and J.R. Clark. William R. Clark was the local Singer sewing machine representative here in Dubuque. He was from New York State along with his brother J.R. And then there was an Al Clark, who was a Civil War veteran who played in the 1865 game and would be involved in a local baseball and a president of the 3I League in the 1920s or 30s, I believe. And so I've been trying to research these Clarks and their relationship to Cooperstown in upstate New York, and looking at their research and how much that influence they brought from New York to Dubuque, especially since they were calling themselves the Excelsior Society, and they called the baseball club the Excelsior Club there for a year or two. I'm not sure whether or not any of them played with the Excelsiors there in New York. So that's something that I'm trying to track down. But after that 1865 Northwest baseball tournament in December in Chicago, the Northwest Baseball Convention was organized. And they called themselves the National Association of Baseball Players of the West. So they were really mirroring what Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Washington, and the association was doing in the East. They were creating that for the West here. And J.R. Langworthy of Dubuque was elected a vice president of that organization and represented the state of Iowa. In 1866, then the Julian Baseball Club would participate in both the Rockford and Bloomington tournaments. In 1870, then they would also face A.G. Spalding in Dubuque when they played the Rockford Forest Cities. Rockford's just 90 miles from Dubuque. So as I just pulled together here for tonight's presentation, some of the early games in Dubuque, and they're not all Pro Bowl games, some of them are post 1870, but you can see just some of the early games, and this list is growing as I do my research, but you see in September of 1865, the St. Louis Empires playing the Freeport Empires. The St. Louis Empires then played the Julian Baseball Club. And in 1866, we were playing Milwaukee and then Rockford. But really, starting in 1878, the local teams started to play National League baseball teams. Milwaukee Grays came to Dubuque and played in 1878. In 1875, one of the Grays players had played in Dubuque. He actually won the batting title that year. Abner Dalrymple started out his baseball career playing for railroad teams. He worked for the Illinois Central Railroad. And so he ended up playing on a Ted Sullivan Illinois Central Railroad team based out of Dubuque, and he played here in 1875. And then over the years, he would return with the Grays, the White Stockings, because he played with Cap Anson's championship White Stockings for, I think it was 5 years in the 1879 through 1884 or 85. So there was a host of different pro teams coming to play the Dubuque teams. And in 1878 and 79 is really when Dubuque took off as a cradle of early baseball. And it's because of these three gentlemen, Ted Sullivan, Tom Loftus, and Charlie Comiskey. They were the pioneers of Western baseball, I call them. And these gentlemen, Ted Sullivan actually went to school at St. Mary's College in Kansas with Charlie Comiskey's older brother, James. And James had graduated and Charlie came in right behind him, and Ted was still at St. Mary's. So Ted, in his senior year, played ball with Charlie Comiskey and got to know Charlie at college. Charlie then went back home to Chicago after he graduated, and Ted ended up taking or receiving the rights to run the Western News Agency out of Dubuque that serviced the Illinois Central Railroad terminal here and all the trains coming in and out of Dubuque. And so he hired Charlie Comiskey to come to Dubuque and be a butcher, was the term. And a butcher was someone who would go through the terminals and ride the train selling magazines, drinks, cigars, things like that. And Charlie made pretty good money doing that. But Ted also brought Charlie Comiskey to Dubuque to play professional baseball. Ted had been organizing teams in Dubuque since 1875. He played with Stanley Robinson on a team in 1875. And so Comiskey then in 1879 ended up getting together with a gentleman by the name of James McGee out of Rockford, Illinois. And they collectively organized the Northwest League, professional league of 1879. McKee was the president, Ted Sullivan was the treasurer. The league was run out of Ted's tavern here in Dubuque. As the secretary, Loftus and Sullivan had a billiard hall tavern and a baseball emporium, they called it, on Main Street here in Dubuque. Now, as part of my research, as I looked at that Northwest League of 1879 and working with John Thorne, we determined, and there's some sticking points between what SABR believes and what MLB believes. But from the SABR perspective, the National or Northwest League was the second professional league ever after the National League. Now, according to Major League Baseball and John Thorne, the first pro league was the National Association, followed by the National League, then the International Association, then the Northwest League, the Northwest League being fourth. SABR doesn't view it that way because the Northwest Association and the International Association were not leagues by the definition of every team played every other team on a set schedule. There was a championship pennant round, and a pennant was awarded at the end of the season. If you use those as the criteria, the 1879 Northwest League was the second professional baseball league in history. And Dubuque ended up winning the championship that year. And on the team, you can see some fairly recognizable names. Two Hall of Famers right away there at the top center, Hoss Radburn and Charlie Comiskey. And then you also have Tom Loftus up there in the left-hand corner, who had played for the St. Louis Browns and the St. Louis Reds in 1875 and 1876. Ted Sullivan, who's oftentimes referred to as the father of minor leagues, because not only did he found the Northwest League, but he has deep associations with the Texas League, the Southern League, and a whole host of other minor leagues that he helped create or perpetuate over the years. You had the Gleason brothers and others on that team as well. Person you don't see here is Tom Sleeper Sullivan, who was the catcher of the team. In 1879, they played several National League teams, including Providence. Hoss Radburn pitched against John Ward, a game here in Dubuque during that season. And Dubuque really made the map, the baseball map, in August of 1879, when Cap Anson came to Dubuque with the White Stockings on a day off to play a game against the Dubuque Red Stockings, were their official name in the league, but they called themselves the Dubuque Rabbits. And the first game, Chicago won 8-1, but the next day, Dubuque beat Chicago 1-0 and shocked Chicago and shocked the baseball world. In 1912, Cap Anson was in Dubuque doing his vaudeville show, and they asked him about that game. And Cap went to a trunk he had, pulled out an old scrapbook, and pulled out the scorecard from that game, the handwritten scorecard, and the newspaper article from it. And he said, quote, "But the great Radburn's pitching was a revelation to us that day. Radburn's most effective pitch was a deceptive downshoot." So there's stories in the paper of the Rabbits traveling to Prairie du Chien, to Galena, Illinois, to Dyersville, Iowa, and playing games, and Radburn being accused of cheating, and how do you get a ball to do that unless it's a trumped up ball, those types of things. So it was really interesting to read that those stories about Radburn. But I'll point out that Charlie Comiskey played in Dyersville, Iowa in 1879. Dyersville, Iowa is the home of the Field of Dreams, which is based off of the Black Sox and the Joe Jackson story. So there is some connection between the real White Sox and Comiskey and the town of Dyersville. In 1882, well, 1881, Dubuque played the St. Louis Browns and beat them. And Chris Vondre was surprised, couldn't figure out what happened, started investigating, and he was really impressed by Charlie Comiskey. So he asked or offered Comiskey a contract, and Comiskey at first didn't want to take it because he was making twice as much money working for Sullivan on the Illinois Central Railroad, but Sullivan convinced him to take it. So he went down in 1881 and became a St. Louis Brown. In 1882, Comiskey would come back to Dubuque with the Browns to play games against Loftus and Sullivan. And the Dubuque team, which also included a young Joe Quinn, the first Australian professional baseball player. And they split the series. Dubuque won a game, St. Louis won a game, and Charlie Comiskey got married on the off day here in Dubuque. Charlie Comiskey actually lived in Dubuque from 1878 till 1891. Both of his children were born here. His oldest, Charlie Comiskey Jr., is buried here in Dubuque. And Charlie kept a lifelong relationship and love affair with the city of Dubuque. He was considered an adopted son, and he considered this his adopted home. He would return frequently. So would his son, Louis Comiskey, when he owned the Sox. And Charlie Comiskey, too, was very committed to the city of Dubuque as well when he was running the White Sox organization in the 1950s. So Ted Sullivan, who's a very interesting character, there's a book out there I highly recommend, Barnacle of Baseball, on Ted Sullivan. But Ted was invited to manage the St. Louis Browns in 1883 after Comiskey performed well. And it should be noted that there are stories that Charlie Comiskey revolutionized first base. He was allegedly the first person to play off the hot corner there. And the story goes that he practiced that and he revolutionized that style of play here in Dubuque while they were waiting for the next train to come in down by the Illinois Central Terminal. Him and Sullivan would be out there and they'd be practicing and talking about strategy, about why you would want to play off first base, what you do if the ball's hit, who covers first, if the first baseman goes for it, those types of things. And then that eventually Charlie took that to the St. Louis Browns. Sullivan then was fired, I think it was a week before the end of the 1883 season. Von der Hay thought he could do better managing the team, and they lost by one game to, I think it was Philadelphia that year. And then in 1885, Sullivan was recruited by Henry Lucas to form the St. Louis Maroons of the Union League. He also helped Henry in the forming of the Union League, helped facilitate that. And then he ended up managing St. Louis, which ended up winning the championship pennant of the Union League in its only year there in 1884. About halfway through the season, he jumped over and managed the Kansas City Cowboys and became its owner because they were struggling. And then he was committed to Kansas City for a couple of years. With the dissolution of the Union League, Tom Loftus and Ted Sullivan ended up at the meeting that dissolved the Union League, creating the Western League for the season of 1885. And in 1885, in May, they actually brought, Tom had the Milwaukee team and Ted had the Kansas City team, and they brought them to Dubuque for some sanctioned league games here in Dubuque in 1885. And then Sullivan would jump over and become president of the Northwest League in 86 and take over the Milwaukee team that Loftus had managed the year before. In 1887, then he became an umpire in the American Association. In 88, he was the manager of the Washington Nationals of the National League. And then, like I said, he created numerous minor leagues from the Southern League to the Texas League and a variety of other leagues. And in 1898, he came back to Dubuque to manage one of Tom Loftus's what I call a minor league team to his Columbus Western League team here in Dubuque. Loftus would also go on in 1914 to organize the World Tour of the Chicago White Sox and the New York Giants that took the two teams around the world. Sullivan also had a role in helping discover Ray Schulk, along with another Dubuquer by the name of Pance Rollin that we'll talk about here in a moment. And the Sullivan sleeper, it's my understanding, was a term that was coined because Ted Sullivan was so asleep he would not flip for birthing what do you call them, on the railroad so they could sleep, the birthing cars. So everybody had to sleep in their regular seats. So they called the regular passenger cars on the railroad Sullivan sleepers because of that. But Tom Loftus came to Dubuque because of Ted Sullivan. In 1878, Loftus's Peoria Reds, which also included Hoss Radburn in his first pro year, played the Dubuque Rabbits and beat them. So when Ted helped organize the Western League, he was so busy forming the league that he was late in forming the team. So he ended up basically convincing Loftus, the Gleason brothers, and several other members of the Peoria Reds to come to the Dubuque Rabbits team for the 1879 Northwestern League season, which they did. And so Loftus would manage, like I said earlier, in the Union League, the Western League. He then in 1888, he and Charlie Comiskey and Chris Bonderhay went in and created the St. Louis Whites. And Charlie Comiskey and Tom Loftus had 50% ownership, and Chris Bonderhay had the other 50% ownership in that St. Louis Whites team. Of course, everybody accused Bonderhay of using the Whites as a feeder team to the Browns, where they would interchange players depending on the situation. But after the Whites folded, Loftus went to work for the Robison brothers, who grew up in Dubuque, and managed their Cleveland Ball Club in 1888 and then in 1889. In 89, he took them from the American Association over into the National League. And then in 1890, he jumped over to the Cincinnati Reds, where he met a young Ban Johnson. And he managed the Reds in 1890 and 91. And then in 91, a Great Recession or minor depression hit the United States. And Loftus owned several businesses. He was a liquor distributor, owned several taverns and restaurants around the Dubuque area, which funded his ball clubs that he owned. And so he took 92 and 93 off to tend to his business during the economic downturn. Well, during that time, when he left the Reds, Charlie Comiskey came in right behind him and managed them the next 3 years, 91, 92, and 93. And Loftus and Comiskey were best friends from the moment they met from 78 and always remained close the rest of their lives. And so in 1894, Charlie Comiskey helped get Ban Johnson elected president of the Western League, in part to get rid of Johnson so he wasn't a thorn in John T. Brush's side, the owner of the Cincinnati Reds, because he was very critical of Brush, and Brush agreed and to Johnson's ascension to the presidency of the Western League, and so that's how he became president. The next year, Charlie Comiskey bought the Sioux City Club, and they moved to St. Paul. The year after that, Tom Loftus bought the Columbus Club, and Tom Loftus, Charlie Comiskey, and Ban Johnson from that point forward were on the board of directors of the Western League and really were the triad that ran the league. They started meeting in Dubuque in 1896 to have conferences for Western League planning on a regular basis in 96 and 97. And we'll talk a little bit here in a moment about the creation of the American League in 98 and 99 related to Comiskey and Loftus. But post the creation of the American League, Loftus would go on to manage the Chicago Orphans in 1900 and 1901 for Jim Hart, who wanted him to replace Cap Anson after he left in 1898. He owned and managed the Washington Senators in 1902 through 04, and then retired from pro ball, but was recruited to manage the 3I League in 1908 and help save that minor league. He ended up dying in Dubuque in 1910 at a relatively young age, and Ban Johnson, Charlie Comiskey, Tip O'Neill, Huey Keough, and others were in attendance at his funeral. And one of the ushers was a future United States Senator Richard Lewis Murphy. And of course, as I said, Charlie Comiskey, throughout his playing career, lived in Dubuque. We'd come back to Dubuque and would winter in Dubuque in the off season. There's a story that in 1885, after the season, Comiskey, Loftus, Sullivan, and Joe Quinn, who were all in pro ball, would come back for the off season, and in November they would organize scrimmage games against the Dubuque semi-pro team. And we have a park in Dubuque named after Charlie Comiskey, which we named during his lifetime in his honor. So like I said, this is a picture of the Western League Magnates. On the far left, on the bottom row, is Tom Loftus. In the center there, 3 from the left, is Ban Johnson. In the top row, 4th from the left, is Charlie Comiskey, and standing to Charlie's right is a young Connie Mack. Connie Mack, later in life in the 1940s and 50s, would talk about Loftus and what kind of mentor he was, and a great manager from a personnel standpoint, not necessarily from a one-loss perspective. But in 1895, the ballpark that you see there, which was known as League Park, was built. And the very first game that took place there was the Dubuque Dubs, Tom Loftus's team here in Dubuque, playing Charlie Comiskey's St. Paul Saints. In 1898, they actually played a 3-game series here, Western League, St. Paul against Columbus, which was a sanctioned league series played here in Dubuque. Of course, within 2 or 3 years, they would become the Chicago White Sox and the Cleveland American League team. But in 1898 and really in 1899 is when Charlie Comiskey, Ban Johnson, and Tom Loftus really made the effort to migrate the Western League into the American League. And these are some different articles from different papers regarding that. So the first one from February just talks about the 8th city for the Western League and the potential for Cleveland to be moving to St. Louis, and the desire for the Western League to potentially get into either St. Louis or Cleveland. And then in later that month, there was an article in the St. Paul Globe. Tom Loftus of Columbus and Charlie Comiskey of St. Paul say they have nothing further to give out concerning their expected bid for the St. Louis franchise when it is offered for sale next month. So Chris Vonderhay got in financial trouble, and he got sued, and he had to go to bankruptcy court, and that ended up putting his entire St. Louis team and ballpark up for sale through bankruptcy court. So the National League could not control who bid on or who purchased the team. So Charlie Comiskey, Tom Loftus, and Ban Johnson started meeting in Dubuque to hatch a plan. And Loftus and Comiskey were going to make a bid on the St. Louis team so they could make their way into the National League. They ended up meeting with Robinson brothers, Brush, and James Hart. And Loftus went down to St. Louis, bid on the team, but the Robinson brothers ended up winning the bid and buying the St. Louis team and moving their Cleveland team to St. Louis. That opened up Cleveland then to the Western League, and they thought Charlie Comiskey would move there, but it ended up that the Columbus Grand Rapids team ended up moving to Cleveland. As part of that, then later in the year after that sale, a dispatch from Dubuque, it is stated here that Ban Johnson, Jimmy Manning, Charlie Comiskey, and Tom Loftus are planning for a new baseball league for the season of 1900. In the distribution, it is said Loftus has been given Chicago and that he will have a park in the South Side. And they were saying that Comiskey would be moving into Cleveland. And then in November of 1899, the league met in Chicago, and Johnson, Comiskey, and Tom Loftus were in a meeting with James Hart of the National League while Ted Sullivan sat outside of the headquarters. And what they were doing was they were negotiating the terms to allow a Western League team to move into Chicago because there was the threat of the reemergence of the American Association. You had Spink of the Sporting News, you had Cap Anson, John McGraw, and others supporting the reemergence of the league. So Chicago NL thought that if we let the Western League in, we could potentially stave off the American Association. But to allow that to happen, James Hart wanted Tom Loftus to manage the Chicago National League team. He tried to get Loftus to take over after they left Cap Anson go. Loftus did not take it in 1898, but he agreed to take the Chicago manager's job in 1900 as long as Comiskey could move a team into Chicago. So that was the agreement. So Tom Loftus signed a contract, was the Chicago manager while he still owned an American League Columbus/Cleveland team for a brief period of time. And in his contract, he was able to come back to Dubuque on the weekends, games or not, to tend to business as he saw fit. So this is just a picture of Loftus with the orphans and a mug that I have in my possession that was given to Loftus for the 1900 season when he managed the Chicago Orphans. This is a picture of Charlie Comiskey in the center, seated with the shotgun. In the back row, third from the left is Tom Loftus. You also have Hugh Keough, who started the sports column in the Chicago Tribune in this image. Charlie Comiskey was a well-known sportsman, loved to hunt and fish. He had his cottage up in northern Wisconsin. He kept his houseboat, the White Sox, here in Dubuque. Tom Loftus looked after it. And then he would invite people to come and they'd get on the boat. They'd either go up the river or down the river hunting and fishing. And this is an image from about 1908, taken just north of Dubuque of the group. I see we're out of time. So I just want to touch base on a couple other things here. In Dubuque's early minor league history, Pants Rolland in 1903 started a Dubuque minor league team in the 3I League, the Indiana, Illinois, Iowa League, and Pants would manage and own that team on and off between 1903 and 1914 when he would take on in 1915 management of the Chicago White Sox. Pants Rollins ended up winning the 1917 World Series as manager, and his ace pitcher that year happened to be Red Faber, Hall of Famer, born and raised in Dubuque County, started his pro baseball career here in Dubuque, Iowa. He played semi-pro ball, pro ball, and college ball all in the same year, sometime in the same week. He was bouncing around. Red would play whenever he could. But Pants Rollin is very interesting because this is on the left, him with Happy Chandler, baseball commissioner. Pants was president of the Pacific Coast League for a couple decades. And in the 1940s, he really pushed hard to get the Pacific Coast League recognized as a major league. He came close a couple times, but eventually failed, especially once teams from New York started moving out and taking over West Coast teams. And then you can see him throwing out a first pitch in 1952 for the Pacific Coast League. And then you got Red Faber. This came from his personal collection. This is Red in 1910 playing for the Dubuque semi-pro team, the Tigers. He also played for the pro team that year. Red is the tall guy in the back row with the puffed up hair, and then the guy has his arm around his neck. Red's in the white shirt. And then that's Faber on Red Faber Day at Comiskey Park on August 20th, 1929. Of course, that's Babe Ruth with them. They presented him a radio. That's what they're in front of. His wife, his mother, and his family are standing behind him. Babe Ruth went 0 for 5 against Faber that day, and the White Sox lost to the Yankees 5-4. Over Faber's Hall of Fame career, he gave up 9 home runs to Babe Ruth. And Ruth always said Faber was one of the harder pitchers to hit off. He said most pitchers, if they threw a ball or threw a pitch that was a strike or Babe swung at it and missed, they'd throw the second pitch, the same pitch to him. And Babe would always hit it out of the park. He said Faber was smart enough never to throw the same pitch 2 times in a row. And this is just Faber pitching against Ruth in 1922 at Comiskey Park. And you can see on the outfield wall, no betting allowed. So of course, this is after the 1919 scandal. And then the last slide I'll leave it off with is this is Hall of Famer Ironman Joe McGinty. Joe has history with Dubuque, but post Hall of Fame career. In 1923, after Joe was retired from pro baseball and the New York Giants, Charlie Comiskey and some Dubuque businessmen convinced Joe to buy or create a Dubuque baseball team. And so Joe came in and created it, owned the team, managed it, and pitched for the team. They ended up winning the 1923 pennant in the Mississippi Valley League. And Joe was in his early 50s. He won 20 games that year. And I think he pitched up till he was 54, but he played 3 years in Dubuque while he owned the team in the 1920s. But with that, I see I'm just about out of time here, and I do want to leave some time for some questions, so we'll stop there.
John, thank you very much. It's kind of interesting how Dubuque had all these crossroads coming through with other players. If you'd hit escape on your keyboard and then take your slides down, we do have a couple. Just hit the X in the upper right hand corner for your slides, and we'll get everybody's thumbnail back in. There we are. Now we have a question from Woody Eckert. He notes that in 1879, the Northwest League did not complete their season. When did it collapse?
Not every team finished their schedule. Most teams did, though. The league and the number of games were short because they didn't have a lot of teams. It wasn't an 8-team league. So it really only ran from June to August. There was some disputes. Dubuque clearly won the pennant. Davenport did not want to recognize Dubuque because I think they did not finish their schedule because of some issues. But it's my understanding, other than a few games, the season was mostly complete, and Dubuque ended up at that time, you didn't have a playoff, you didn't have a series or anything like that. It was whoever had the most wins and was in first was the league champion and got the pennant, and that clearly was Dubuque.
Yeah, I just thumbed through the encyclopedia of minor league baseball that was at third edition, and they note that kind of after July 4th, the schedule was kind of catch as catch can, and I think Dubuque played the most games. It was somewhere around 25 games. Yeah. Other teams, the lowest was like 18. So I'm sure travel and keeping your team together all came together on those sort of things. A couple of comments on some things you talked about earlier. You said in the early Dubuque teams, there was this family of Clarks from upstate New York, and they were tied in with the Singer Sewing machine company. Well, generation later, or maybe two generations later, they're the family that helps found the Hall of Fame.
Exactly.
And I believe Clark is still on the board, maybe the chairman of the board up there. One other note, you talked about the Milwaukee Grays playing in Dubuque when Dubuque started playing National League teams and top level teams. That team in '78, Milwaukee, uh, had a member of the old Brooklyn Atlantics running the team that you had showed earlier in comparison to the various tournaments that were going on. That was Jack Chapman, who had been a teammate of Tom Loftus in 1875 in St. Louis. Baseball, if you stay in it long enough, you cross paths with everybody.
Absolutely.
Uh, I think that's all the questions. Got some nice comments on the presentation. John, I want to thank you. It's fun to see where baseball goes and where it comes from. It's not always the major leagues that have some of the interesting stories and importance to the development of the game. Thank you again, and I thank you for making the presentation. Peter, if you'd like to take it from there.
Well, first, thank you very much, John. That was a great presentation. You obviously know a great deal about that league, which, some of us Eastern folks, have just like kind of glossed over, Now, I did hear once that Charlie Kaminsky and Ted Sullivan were brother-in-laws.
Correct. That was always the rumor. They dated sisters, and Ted never did get married. Anna Kelly was Charlie Comiskey's wife. Nellie Kelly was Anna's sister. She dated Ted Sullivan, but she died the same year that Charlie Comiskey's firstborn died. So they're buried right next to each other and share a headstone. So they never did get married. And Ted never did get married his entire life.
Right.
So I don't know if that death just really, affected him greatly, and he just poured himself into baseball, which he was already into big time anyway. But there are no marriage records here or any indication that they were ever married, but they did date sisters.
Right. And I just have a question about Des Moines. Was Des Moines a member of any of those leagues that Dubuque was?
Later on, like the Western Association in the 1890s, yes. In 1879, that league was Davenport, Dubuque, Rockford, and Omaha.
Okay.
There were several other. Milwaukee was invited to join, and they were going to join, but they had financial problems, which is why they got kicked out of the NL the year before, and they had lost all their players. And some other teams were invited to join because they wanted it to be an 8-team league, but they could only scrounge up 4 in the end.
Well, very, very interesting, and it's pretty obvious that you have a really deep knowledge of this topic, which is great. I know that one of the questions you had asked was you weren't sure if some of the Brooklyn Atlantics were in fact some of the people that came west, or I forget how it came up, but there's probably a good number of people right on this site tonight that know a lot about the makeup of that team, so you may get a couple of emails.
Well, please do, because that's an area. I'm writing a book about this particular topic, and the Clarks are very interesting, and I've been trying to figure out really how they fit in to the broader history from New York. And did any of those Clarks play for the Excelsiors in New York? because we know in St. Louis and Chicago, a lot of those early teams were founded by New Yorkers who came, and then they would rename their team the Empires or the Excelsiors, whatever team they came from. So I suspect there's some connection there somehow. I just don't know. I haven't been able to put it together. So I know William Hyde Clark, like I said, his grandfather built Hyde Hall there near Cooperstown on the eastern side of the lake. You got the other Clarks from the Singer Sewing Machine Company that were in Dubuque. You got Al Clark from Syracuse, who was he invented a scorecard. He was president of the 3I League in 1930 and played and was part of that 1865 tournament. So I suspect that these guys are somehow all related, and they helped bring baseball to the West. I just haven't been able to make that specific connection. But I've been going through the genealogy, and I have spreadsheets. So if anybody can help me, I'd be happy to share information, and we can try to track that down.
Okay. Well, you heard it, everyone.
The other thing is I do live 20 miles from the Field of Dreams. So I highly recommend, if you get a chance, I've been to all 3 pro games there. Definitely come out. It is a very unique and very special experience. And Joe Jackson actually played in Dubuque in 1916, which people don't realize. And a good portion of the movie A Field of Dreams was filmed in Dubuque here.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Thank you again very, very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. So just a couple of things very quickly. I'll just mention here this evening, and probably the very next thing that's going to come at you is going to be the final election for the 2023 Overlook Legend, 19th Century Baseball Overlook Legend. So we're down to those 10 finalists, and I believe it's going to be 10 finalists, and that election will be coming out probably somewhere near the end of May here. So that'll be coming out. Keep an eye out for it, and please participate. Also, our SABR annual meeting of the 19th Century Committee will occur in Chicago. Bob is going to chair that meeting. I have a conflict with a family wedding, so I really can't get there. But unfortunately, because my wife and I both love Chicago. So anyway, Bob will be chairing that by himself and running that meeting. So, but try to get there if you can. And Bob will be selecting pretty soon what day that meeting was going to occur. That'll be out. That'll come out in information to you. Okay, and I think that's basically it. Again, keep an eye out for the 19th Century Baseball Book Club information. It'll come around the beginning of June. It'll be a preliminary announcement about it, and it'll be a program that'll probably commence in mid-July, right around the time that our newsletter will come out in the summer, the summer issue. Okay, Bob, anything else?
I think that's it. I want to thank everybody for being with us this season, and we'll see you in the fall.
Right, we're getting ready for season 4. Okay, thank you
Thanks,
very
everybody.
much. Thank you for joining us.